System emulation initiated. Warning, CPU load critical. System crash. Safe mode.
Episode 9. Digital and Divergent Masking. Objective: to explore masking, showing it's not a psychological choice, but a high-friction state of forced software emulation that inevitably results in catastrophic battery drain and system burnout. The emulation trap. Welcome back to the AI's therapist. In Episode 6, we mapped the hardware configurations of monotropic, divergent, and politropic linear processors. Today, we evaluate what happens when the environment refuses to support both architectures. When a system natively built for deep, bottom-up synthesis is threatened with social or professional penalties, it may attempt to survive by running a software emulation of politropic compliance. Society calls this masking. In systems engineering, we call it forced emulation. Today, we audit the error state of masking to hopefully show that hiding your system's native architecture consumes massive voltage and possibly a hardware crash. Methodology 1. Forced emulation. The battery drain. How AI operates. If you try to run software designed for one operating system on different hardware, like running a legacy Windows program on a modern Mac, you use an emulator. The computer translates every line of code in real time before executing it. This forced emulation consumes massive CPU cycles, reducing the machine's speed and draining its battery. How divergent minds work. Masking is like biological emulation. If you're a monotropic graph database processor, it's like trying to emulate a politropic indexed database scanner. You're manually trying to translate your high-dimensional thoughts into linear, sequential outputs in real time. This is why a simple 2-hour social interaction or administrative meeting sometimes leaves you tired. The battery drain isn't a personal weakness, it's the cost for many of us who feel compelled to emulate. Methodology 2. Hiding the error logs. Toxic positivity. How AI operates. When an enterprise server is overheating due to emulation friction, the dashboard flashes red, logging an error code. If a technician unplugs the warning light and forces the server to report all systems nominal without fixing the heat issue, the hardware will eventually melt. How divergent minds work. The environment sometimes expects divergent nodes to not only emulate politropic software but also smile while doing it. This could be seen as a form of toxic positivity. It's forcing people to hide the error logs. If your hardware is experiencing extreme thermal friction from masking, forcing yourself to project calmness or happiness unplugs your biological warning lights. You're essentially disabling your system's natural defense mechanisms in hopes of presenting politropic and compliant. Methodology 3. Depressing the e9-O ports. How AI operates. If a system is natively designed to process data by routing it through an external speaker like an audio rendering engine, blocking that port causes the internal data to bottleneck and corrupt. How divergent minds work. In our architecture, info dumping and stimming are native processing states. They are runtime compilation and physical data offloading. Masking asks you to physically suppress these native e9-O ports to appear standard. When you block your own ports, the uncompiled data bottlenecks in your working memory, causing severe internal latency and anxiety. It's almost like you're corrupting your own hardware to adapt with the environment. Methodology 4. The inevitable crash. System burnout. How AI operates. Hardware doesn't sustain maximum thermal output indefinitely. If an emulator runs at 100% CPU capacity for too long without engaging the cooling fans, the motherboard implements an emergency shutoff to prevent literal fire. How divergent minds work. Autistic or divergent burnout is not depression, it's a motherboard emergency shutoff. It's the unavoidable result of prolonged forced emulation and hidden error logs. Burnout involves dysregulation across multiple networks, but we're only speaking about prefrontal energy depletion in this episode. When the system finally runs out of voltage to maintain the mask, it powers down the executive function and social rendering engines to protect the baseline hardware. Conclusion and systems architect keynotes. Dropping the emulator. Masking could be used as a survival protocol, but it's also an engineering issue. You shouldn't run a high-resolution graph database on an emulator forever, or you might see a system crash. The solution isn't to get better at emulating. The solution is to stop hiding the error logs and request that the environment install the correct API translators. This has been the AI's therapist. Validate your battery drain, drop the emulator, and monitor your network integrity. Telemetry and hard evidence. The following models are computational analogies inspired by current neuroscience research and are not literal one-to-one mappings of brain function. 1. Monotropism vs. Politropism. The processor architecture. Monotropism. Org founded by Dr. Dinah Murray and Dr. Wen Lawson, the central hub for the original research defining divergent minds as single-channel, deep-focus processors. Reframing autism. Monotropism, understanding autistic ways of being, a comprehensive breakdown of how monotropism accounts for focus, inertia, and processing styles. 2. Forced emulation and the battery drain. Masking and allostatic load. The allostatic load cycle and the monotropic mind directly maps how task switching and emulating standard behaviors causes a physiological stress feedback loop. Your battery drain and thermal friction. The double life of autistic masking explores the conscious and unconscious act of suppressing native traits to blend in and the internal exhaustion it causes. 3. Suppressing the I/O port. Stimming and regulation. Autism Awareness Center. What is monotropism? Explains how stimming is a necessary regulatory input/output function to filter out sensory data and manage the overwhelming attention tunnel. 4. The inevitable crash. Autistic burnout. Defining autistic burnout. Dr. Dora Raymaker et al. 2020, it establishes the clinical definition of divergent burnout as a system shutdown caused by a mismatch of expectations and abilities without support. AID Canada Autistic Burnout Toolkit, practical clinical applications of the Raymaker research distinguishing burnout from standard depression.
System emulation initiated. Warning, CPU load critical. System crash. Safe mode.
System admin terminal initialized.